You know, probably next week when I find out myself. But I am joined again by the old co-host, my good friend Dru Rusanski. You want to say hello, Dru?
Hello, and I'm invisible today.
Yeah, he decided to call in. He's being lazy. He didn't want to drive into the studio. And we're mocking him for this, clearly. So, tonight we're going to continue our discussion of witches. Real quick, before we get into that, I do want to promote our two sponsors. As everyone should know, because we've been doing this one for a while now, you guys can get a free 1-month trial with Audible by going to audibletrial.com/paranormale, audibletrial.com/paranormale. It's a really great service where you get audiobooks every month. If you sign up for the free trial, you do get a free audiobook, which is yours to keep, even if you don't decide to continue with a paying membership. They have literally thousands of books on there, paranormal, fantasy, horror, science fiction. They even have all of my usual co-host, Brian McKinley's novels are on there. So you can sign up, get one of those, get something else. And it really helps out the show if you do sign up for that free link. The other thing to consider, folks, I know these days the internet is literally everywhere, but your security is a bigger and bigger concern, am I right? Dru, would you agree internet security is a big deal?
Yeah, especially now that with a couple of decisions with the courts and the FCC, your security is non-existent. Your information can be sold at whim.
So there's a way to fight back.
Yeah.
Which is...
You hide it.
Yeah. So there's... Legally, let's be clear, this is a legal thing. You're not going to be breaking the law or doing anything dodgy. But there's a really cool website out there called NordVPN. If you look in the description of this video, you'll find an affiliate link. You can sign up, and that also enormously benefits the show. We're talking military-grade encryption here, folks. Basically, what you do is you log in to one of their servers, and they have over 4,000 all over the world. And then from there, you're going onto the internet. So all of your internet traffic, instead of going to your IP address and being able to be traced back to you instantly, goes to them. This comes in handy. One, it doubly encrypts all of your credit cards and other private information. And to make it even more helpful, it also means that if the U.S. government wants to try to subpoena your internet records, well, one, according to NordVPN, they delete all of their customers' records constantly. They don't save any of it. Is that true or not? I've seen some debate on the internet. On the other hand, the company's based in Panama. So good luck on the government getting Panama to force them to do something.
And if you're not worried about doing criminal activity, it is still useful. Yeah. If you do not want your cable provider to sell your information, such as your browsing history,
yes, absolutely,
to various companies.
Here's another consideration. So we are a worldwide show since we're on the internet. There's a chance that somebody out there is listening to this in, say, China. China's infamous for having this the Great Firewall of China that blocks all sorts of websites. If you use NordVPN, the beauty of it is you can choose to sign in from a country other than your own. So you can sign in and view the internet the way that somebody in the United States, if you're living in China, you can view it the way somebody in the United States sees it, somebody in Japan sees it. You can circumvent those firewalls. Another place this comes in handy, I've had this happen before. I'm betting other people have. You're on your work or your school Wi-Fi, and you need to look something up. Now, I'm not saying you should be doing anything dodgy, like you're looking up porn at work or anything like that. No, don't do that. But, every once in a while I've had times working in the hotel industry when I needed to look something up for a guest, and for whatever reason, corporate had blocked that website. NordVPN gets you around that too. But that, because of the fact, well, it'd have to be on your personal device, obviously, not on unless you downloaded it to your work computer. I suppose you could make a case for doing that just by virtue of, hey, boss, it's more encryption. But it's definitely an extra level of being able to access things when you really need to find something. You know, you're at school, you're on your school network, you really need to look something up, but for whatever reason, your school won't let you look at that website, even on your own laptop. Well, it don't matter, because the way it circumvents things, you'll still be able to do it. But enough advertising. Let's get into our topic.
Yes.
So witches. Why don't we get...
Spooky witches.
Yes. The two big things I want to cover tonight, there's plenty more you and I can get into on the subject, but one is climate change and witches, which we only briefly touched on last time, 2 weeks ago now, and modern neo-paganism and Wicca versus witch in a historical context.
Okay, that's a big one, but all right, let's do it.
Yeah, why don't we start with climate change and witches?
All right, in order to understand how climate change and witches are related, you have to go cover the history a little bit.
Yes.
And we got to talk about a couple other things. So, I promise we will get back to witches shortly. But first, we're going to talk about Reformation Europe. This is the time period around the Renaissance, which the Renaissance refers to an art movement more than an actual time period. So, just going to throw that one out there. But it's the same. It's basically kind of the same time. Now, around this time, you see the rise of Protestantism within Europe, which came with a lot of new ideas that challenged conventional wisdom. You also saw the rise of various scientific developments, and you see a lot of other paradigm shifts, both in structure and law, and it was very much a time of change. So you can, as with any period of change, people get uneasy about said change. So you have this all going on, and you also happen to have what's known as the Knights Rebellion, which was some knights sat down with Martin Luther's teachings and went, hey, we're all equal under the eyes of the Lord, so why do we have a ruling class? Now, Martin Luther absolutely did not go for this at all. He very much spoke out against it, but that didn't really matter. So the Knights Rebellion was fairly swiftly stomped out, but it created a fear of an uprising of the lower classes to overthrow the upper classes, which is very important for what we're about to talk about.
Yes.
So, this is all going on. On top of that, I mentioned that this is the rise of Protestantism. Now, I'm certain some of the Christians or former Christians who are listeners will remember having to go to church every Sunday.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yep. That tradition comes from this time period. It was actually implemented first by the Protestants to make sure that none of their congregation was actually going to Catholic Mass. So as a means of keeping tabs on people, which kind of gives you further understanding about how much or how little trust people have for their neighbors during this time period.
Is that ever changed, really, though? I'm just thinking about modern history.
Pedophile
there are
periods where it's
communism
worse.
Scares.
Yeah. There's periods where it's worse and periods that it's better.
Granted.
It kind of just ebbs and flows. This was one of the worst periods. Now, particularly since the Middle Ages, you didn't see that as bad. You had very strong communities and a lot of distrust outwards. Mm-hmm. This is where you start seeing a lot of distrust inwards. So, on top of this, so we have a fear of the lower classes rising up. We have generalized distrust of everyone around you. And now what's more, we're going to have climate change. And here's where our climate change and witches come in.
Oh, yes.
So, climate change leads to crop failure. Whether it's from increased numbers of insects in areas they previously didn't swarm, whether it's in a change in the rain cycles and temperatures, so that way when things are planted, they're planted at the incorrect times. There's all different ways in which climate change can and does affect crop yield. Luckily now it's not as severe because we can predict what's happening a little bit better with satellite imagery and pesticides, but those were not available to the Reformation Europe.
Yeah.
And what goes along with crop failure? Famine. And what goes along with famine? Miscarriages and disease.
Famine and pestilence.
Yep, go hand in hand.
Oh yes.
And when people don't have enough, they also war to get enough.
All of which leads to death, the four horsemen.
So there's honest to God death cults from the late Middle Ages through this entire period that believe that the apocalypse was upon them. They were more popular than, and was a bigger issue than 2012, if you guys remember that.
Oh, good Lord. That's scary. Hold on.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to. Drew's on the line. He couldn't come in, so he's calling in. Sorry, everyone, just catching my producer up. Beth is going to sit in as well. We're on
all right.
How climate change started the witch craze in Europe.
Witch hunts.
Witch hunts.
Witch craze is not a good term.
Fair.
Because it was exceedingly logical.
True. Witch craze maybe is a little more accurate for Salem. Given it was
once again, it was logical.
Yeah.
It was maneuvering.
True,
Social
but it was
maneuvering.
also driven by much pettier greed-based reasons.
Oh, yes. As opposed to a generalized series of problems in Europe, all culminating in... Yeah. Well, we pretty much talked about most of the problems leading into it. So now we have crop failure, we have famine, we have death, we have pestilence, we have miscarriages. And on top of that, we have a fear that the peasants will rise, which is only made worse by all of these terrible conditions they're living in. Now, the kings of Europe ruled by divine right. Everything will go well as long as they and the people under them maintain God's favor. So everything going catastrophically wrong would indicate they have lost God's favor. Now, this is where they have that nice little backdoor solution. Oh, no. Things aren't going catastrophically wrong because I've been living a life of sin. They're going wrong because there's a witch trying to test our faith. And here's where you see climate change related to witchcraft. Witches were believed to cause miscarriages.
Yep.
Witches were believed to cause crop failure, to cause blights, whether they're fungal or whether they can summon insects.
Killing
they will transform into wolves or bring wolves in. And when you have climate change, you see a shifting in predatory ranges. So areas that were not typically blighted by wolves now have those as well, because there's more competition for food. Almost every single thing that a witch could do could also be explained through climate change.
Yep. Interestingly, I did a little bit of research on this. It seems like historians are a little divided on what caused the climate change in question. The primary theory seems to be that it was a number of volcanic eruptions.
I'm not an expert on that.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
I don't know for certain either. Just the consensus. There's debate in its history. There's usually at least a degree of debate on topics like, well, why did Europe go into an ice age up till basically the 19th century?
Well, there's also a a theory, even not within Europe, but even within Egypt during the different pharaohs. There was a time where everybody treated the pharaohs as they were, god kings.
Yes.
And then there was one particular pharaoh who had the unfortunate pleasure of, during his reign, there was a huge climate shift. And everything that could have gone wrong went wrong with the crops, the livestock, travel, trade, the whole 9 yards. And so because everybody was praying to him and the gods, specifically to him because he was supposed to be their representative between the two, and nothing was going correct, that's when there was the power shift between how much the pharaoh themselves could do and how much the clergy was taking over.
Mm-hmm. Am I the only one who's noticing a parallel here? Because I'm just thinking of hurricanes and tornadoes today and how often they get blamed on things like the legalization of gay marriage.
The main thing that people tend not to realize is just how similar our ancestors were to us.
But the thing is, because everybody's all, in science and whatnot, in today's day and age, you can't be as vague as, oh, it's witchcraft, oh, it's devil work, oh, it's this. You have to have a specific reason that has...
It's God's wrath because of homosexual marriage.
That's
apparently God has terrible aim.
That actually reminds me of a joke that I learned on Vicar of Dibley, if anybody wants to hear it.
Go for it.
Okay, so a vicar and a gentleman by the name of Bob. They're out golfing one day. And Bob hits to the hole, and he misses it by a 2-foot putt. And he goes, "Damn, missed the bugger." And he says, "You shouldn't say that or God will strike you dead." And he's like, "My apologies, vicar. I'll keep it in mind." Well, the next hole comes up, and he misses it again by a 2-foot putt. And he's like, "Damn, missed the bugger." And the vicar tells him again, "What did I just say? God is going to strike you down again for that language because that's blasphemy." "Oh, my apologies, my apologies." Next hole, same thing. Misses it by half a foot. "Damn, missed the bugger." Lightning strikes. Lightning strikes down and hits the vicar dead. And you hear rumbling up in the clouds. "Damn, missed the bugger."
It is, but you look at it, it's like, hurricanes hit Texas. Why? Because Ireland legalized same-sex marriage. It's like,
that has nothing to do with any of that. If anything,
I'm sorry,
the faithful will be celebrating.
Doesn't all-powerful God have better aim than hit Texas when aiming at Ireland?
I will grant you that Ireland is small in comparison to Texas, but then again,
everything's small compared to Texas.
Not Trump's ego, but if we're talking ego sizes.
Well, the size of Trump's ego dwarfs the entire universe. Let's be honest.
I wouldn't go that far. I would go at least the galaxy.
And now we're edging into politics, and I don't want to do that.
No. We're ego measuring.
Yeah, true.
So we're talking over the course of his career. There's a difference.
And hello, Lord Ruin, an old friend of the shows who goes all the way back to the Gentili shows, just turned up in chat. I am very glad you joined us.
Great.
For people out there listening, keep in mind I do keep an eye on chat both on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you're too shy to call in, and if you want to call in, the number's at the bottom of the screen. But if you're too shy to call in, you feel free to ask me a question there, and I'll be happy to try to answer it or pose it to Drew, our current witch expert, Drew. But the thing that I think I run into, and it's what I'm alluding to with the gays are causing climate change for all intents and purposes. People, and it's an argument I've had with atheists from time to time, people like to think of the witch trials as religious hysteria, and they need religion to happen. It's like, we're quite capable of doing this without religion.
Oh, yeah. Because like you were mentioning before with Salem, that was literally a real estate grab. That's literally all it was. They took superstition and expounded upon it, twisted it around just for their own purposes.
But for that matter,
it's all for grabbing land.
McCarthyism was politically motivated. And, they still managed to do a witch hunt.
But
especially with all
if we can also look at a little bit more to get a better idea, because we didn't necessarily talk about how they pick targets. for witches. Now, and if we don't do that, we don't get into quite how logical all of this was.
Oh, yes.
Now, the late Middle Ages saw a better crop yield than the Reformation era. And some of the changes happened fairly suddenly. Take, for example, insect swarms. Now, I had mentioned that Protestantism was on the rise. One of the things that Protestant rulers would do is they would try and get rid of all of the elements of Catholicism within their realm, which would include up to closing down monasteries and convents. The men were able to reintegrate into society because they had full property rights.
Yep.
Women were starting to gain some property rights, but they could only inherit through their husband or their father. But as part of being a nun, they had already given up all of their property claims through their father. So, they cannot effectively reintegrate into society. So you wind up with large-scale crop failure and a strange old woman showing up at the same time. People naturally assumed that the correlation was causation and that she had caused the crop failure.
Yep.
Which we do all the time. We make those same mistakes.
Oh, yes. And you know, one of the most classic examples, of course, is people think vaccines cause autism because of an imagined correlation between the two.
There isn't a correlation.
No.
There isn't at all. It was complete bogus science, and people need to accept
And
that.
I highly encourage anybody listening, because it's great fun. If you don't understand why correlation doesn't prove causation is so important, Google bizarre correlations.
Oh, like that list you pulled up the other week?
Yes.
That was beautiful.
My absolute favorite, and I've mentioned it more than once on the show, is there's a clear correlation between the granting of PhDs in mathematics and suicides by asphyxiation.
I mean...
That's a hell of a countdown.
Don't judge those mathematicians.
I mean...
It's like no rational person's going to say granting a PhD to one person causes another completely unrelated person to drown themselves. Yet there's a correlation.
Something I did want to point out that Drew had brought up with, you know, you have suddenly these women of various ages, depending on when they had joined the convent, going out at the same time, these natural events were happening. What also didn't help was, even though Protestantism was on the rise, there were still some superstitions left over from Catholicism and stuff from when it first rose up, where, and especially since in order to be, you know, running an apothecary, you essentially had to have dangly bits below your waist. It wasn't an acceptable job for women because even though, as you had mentioned, they could get property rights either through their husband or through their father, it really wasn't acceptable when Protestantism was first rising for women to really have much by an actual job outside of like basic menial tasks of cleaning other people's homes. And otherwise they were meant to be homekeepers. So especially because in convents, you would be taught various trades, soap making, medicine work, things like that. And it's also whenever anybody became ill, if they provide medicine, but the person just happened to be too late or just easily susceptible, which was very easy at that time because of malnutrition due to the failing crops and what have you, that because the death toll would rise that way, they would also immediately be blamed because they were the herbal woman, they were the hedge witch.
Yeah, a lot of the people that were targeted, midwives were another popular target. And one of the things you run into is where the doctors of the Middle Ages, the priests of the Middle Ages, didn't understand the importance of washing their hands. There was a huge number of lives saved when a doctor finally noticed, if after I cut up a cadaver, if I wash my hand, the baby I deliver is much more likely to survive. Whereas midwives understood the importance of cleanliness and hygiene and things of this nature. So
not necessarily for the reasons that we'd assume. It was largely part of the superstitious rituals.
Oh yes, absolutely. Another common example that relates to this is during the plague years in Europe, a lot of the time in Jewish communities, the plague wasn't as prominent as Christian communities because Judaism has religious rituals and religious prohibitions about how very important it is to keep strict hygiene. And since the main way that bubonic plague was passed from person to person was actually through coughing and sneezing, washing your hands was absolutely crucial to curbing the course of the plague. But when Christians are dying in droves, as much as maybe half to a third of Europe's population died of the plague, when Christians are dying in droves and the Jews are surviving it, or the babies that go to the doctor die and the babies that go to the midwife survive, people start going, wait a minute, somebody's doing something evil.
And that's the funny thing too, because sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to get into bathing. There's a misconception that during the early Middle Ages, people didn't bathe. Bathing actually fell off due to the bubonic plague. Many of the people in Europe were still utilizing Roman baths, which many of the Roman baths utilized hot springs, which by the time they ran them through everything were close to human temperature. If you have one sick person going to a bath, that's the perfect temperature for the
plague to spread.
Bacteria or virus to live outside the host for an extended period of time. It spreads like wildfire. And that was one of the reasons why people stopped bathing as frequently, is because they were afraid of the bathwater spreading the illness.
So it wasn't even that stupid of a reason.
Oh, no. No, not at all.
The science is there. It says, guess what? You're taking a risk.
Well, then there's also the whole tradition that started later when it came to bathing, especially when people actually started getting their own tubs in their house. Granted, it wasn't like the clawfoots that we have now, but it was still a basic bathing tub where, in order to, one, preserve your resources, and B, so that this way, if one person bathed and was fine, everybody else was assumed to be bathing and was fine, was everybody used the same bath water. And then it was dumped out once everybody had their turn, which is why we had, literally because of how dirty the water would be at the end, was don't throw out the baby with the bath water. Was because you could actually lose a child with how murky it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I break your brain, or did we
just
topic?
Taking a moment for the horror of the realities. There's this thing that there's a great discussion people like to have about which decade would you prefer to live in. My answer is this one, and there's two reasons for this. One is modern medicine. The other, and one of the simplest reasons, is modern sanitation.
You'd be surprised how important the invention of the toilet was. The flushing toilet, I would argue, is the most important invention that mankind has ever done. I'd say it trumps the wheel.
I'd say vaccinations run a close second.
And precursor to that, it was the outhouse that was like over a river, because that would just clear it out. You didn't have to really worry about mess or anything staying behind.
Or the Roman sewers that would utilize underwater springs.
Yeah. They get the waste away from people. The number of lives, that I absolutely agree with you. Indoor plumbing, flushing toilets, the ability to take a shower in your house and not have to use the same water that your mother, your father, and your sister, and your 3 siblings used, are massively underappreciated inventions of the human species.
Well, there's also the small fact that, and this is something that I've been told numerous times, regardless of how you feel, you could survive in another time, whether it's 10 years ago, 30 years ago, back at turn of the century, what have you, or even further back, days of the pharaohs, back when we still had, emperors in Rome. Whatever you think you already know to help you survive, at the very most, if you're lucky, you will know enough to survive socially. You won't know jack squat about the day-to-day. How do you do this? How do you do the simple things such as going to the bathroom? They didn't have toilet paper back then. They still use leaves for a lot of things. And parchment, if you're somebody who usually carries around a notebook and wants to take notes, guess what? If you go back and that's the only thing in your hand, you'll be lucky if that's still on you, because there is no right rhyme or reason why anybody should have that. That will have you stand out and possibly on everybody's crap list as soon as everything starts going downhill.
Oh, yeah. And there's so much more we could say about the subject than we have in the past.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, just to give people an idea of the importance of modern medical technology alone, you know, if you're my age or younger, ask your grandparents about polio during the 40s and 50s.
Tuberculosis. My grandfather was actually one of the test subjects for the vaccine that came out.
You know,
what a fantastic world we live in, where we have vaccines and don't get polio.
Yeah, what a wonderful world.
It'd be great if people didn't mess it up.
Yeah, what a wonderful world we live in, where smallpox, a disease that killed 500 million people in the 20th century by itself, that's not counting the rest of human history, is something that today my children, your children are going to read about in history books. It's not something they're ever going to, you know, I'm 41. I've never seen in my life, and barring, you know, some terrorist or some other situation where humans release on accidentally or purposefully, smallpox, you know, barring that, I will never see a smallpox outbreak in my lifetime. And neither will my children. And that is phenomenal. It is so eradicated, we don't need to vaccinate it for it anymore.
And then you have things like the mumps, which that's starting to make a comeback because people aren't getting vaccinated. And there's some people who won't get certain vaccinations for very severe side effects that are considered common. There's for chickenpox specifically. The type of vaccination that was out a few years ago, I'm not sure if it's the same one. One of the known side effects for that strain of vaccinations was possible sterilization.
Which is serious.
And you have to keep getting boosters to make sure it's effective, which increases the chance of sterilization. And it may not even be effective by the time you're 20. So, or it can cause outbreak of shingles far earlier than it's supposed to.
True, but here's the thing, because people love to talk about the value, and that there's true, but they have a shingles vaccine as well. And this is important because people love to talk about the importance of natural immunity. It's better to just catch chickenpox and have your body build up the resistance naturally. Number one, I caught chickenpox when I was about 14. It was one of the most horrible experiences of my life.
I had as a baby. I thankfully don't remember that shit.
Yeah. Two, if you get the highest probability of you getting shingles is if you contracted chickenpox as a child. You can potentially get it through the vaccine, although I believe, as I understand it, the newer vaccines eliminate the problem, and you can get a vaccine to prevent shingles anyway.
While fair, the main issue that was being brought up was as that particular version.
Sterilization is another serious problem.
Well, no, that is, well, there's that. The increases the risk of sterilization, but the way that the original strain worked for the chickenpox vaccine, and this is what I'm remembering the data that I was looking at correctly. Granted, this was a few years ago, actually more than 5 years ago now. So yes, they more likely came out with different chickenpox.
They've definitely come out with better.
Then. But it would actually essentially stack. Like if you were stacking the same feat over and over again on a D&D character, it would essentially stack, and to the point where it would actually be over time with the boosters and everything, greatly increase your chances over if you got chickenpox naturally. So it would still be a higher percentage regardless, but it was still it just really wasn't all that safe.
And we've jumped on a soapbox and gotten completely off topic. So we've hit the half-hour mark.
Let's reel it in a little bit.
Yes, true.
Like I've got a nice little thing to get us sorted back. So we'll talk about early medieval medicine and magic. What?
Drew, hold on a sec. So before we get into that, I do want to give out the phone number for folks in case anybody has a question. 609-807-2492, 609-807-2492. Please feel free to call in, ask questions, make comments, laugh at us if you think we're all crazy.
Snark is appreciated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, always. Just remember, if you're going to call in, please mute your computer.
Or walk out of the room. It's not that hard.
Yeah. You will sound very foolish, and people will laugh at you if you have the computer playing the show while you're on the phone. Trust me.
I'm just getting an image of somebody who cannot actually walk out of the room. They have a rotary phone that they called in on, and they're stuck there with somebody's tablet. They don't know how to use the mute button calling it. Much like Miss Crazy Lady from Vegas.
Oh, yes.
That was beautiful. Or Nevada. I'm not sure if she was actually from Vegas, but she was a trip.
But we are generally nice to our callers. We had a very nice caller last week.
Yes, it's true.
So why don't we get it, now that we've given out the number and baited people into calling in, why don't we get into medieval medicine and magic?
All right. So if we're looking at late Middle Ages, predominantly what we're looking at are surgeons who are monks, midwives, and then apothecaries who just sell stuff predominantly.
They give you the
but the clergy are the main doctors. But if we go back a little bit further, you wind up seeing leeches, as they were called.
Weren't they actually leeches? So what else would you call
them?
No,
they're not using it as a little. This was the name for the person who would go.
The people. Okay.
They would sometimes
yes, the
prescribe
people
leeches.
were known as leeches.
My mistake.
And they would do bloodletting as well.
Yes.
But they had their own methods for doing things and had a much higher success rate than monks later on in history. They wound up actually finding different ways to fight bacterial illnesses by going through this entire process and combining different things and boiling them in, I believe it was a copper cauldron. The actual ingredients themselves weren't significant other than the fact that it managed to draw copper out of the cauldron itself. And the copper killed the bacteria.
Ah.
Which is interesting because it was just recently used. That method was recently used to treat a antibiotics-resistant staph infection in England.
Oh, wow.
And it worked.
That's actually hilarious because I had a science teacher who actually had a copper band on. And even though after a while her skin started turning colors because of it, because that's just when naturally, it's kind of like when you set copper off in a firework, it's going to turn green. But she said, ever since I got this and wore it every day was a gift, I almost never get sick. I, feel better than I have in years. And all typical ailments that she had before she got this. And she didn't know any of the possible healing properties on it afterwards. She actually looked it up because she was bored one day. Several months afterwards when she was already feeling better.
It is fascinating, and a lot of the things, the origin of the word occult is related to magic and medicine of the early Middle Ages. Because what's the definition of occult? Pure dictionary definition. Hidden.
Secret or hidden knowledge.
Yep. And so you would have the physical properties of something. This leaf is green. It has a certain number of points. It's an interesting shape. And then you'd have the occult properties of that leaf, which would be its medicinal uses. A practitioner of the occult frequently just knew basic chemistry.
And herbal, the reality of herbs and there are medicinal plants that, we've refined them now, and we even use some things that would have been considered deadly poisons a few hundred years ago, because we realized, wait, if we refine this properly, it actually will save your life. Digitalis and nightshade are two common examples of that.
Oh yeah, and the thing is, sorry, you're saying?
Yeah.
I don't know. Go.
I was going to say, even with the refining process, and there's the refining process which takes out some impurities, but there's still some left as balancers. We're also starting to get into that dangerous aspect when it comes to medicine, where the pure form is actually possibly causing more issues than it's actually meant to help for.
Well, yeah, there's a whole complicated chemistry to it, and you are right. There are times when, there's advantages to drugs over herbs in the fact that if you take a herb, there's a degree of, okay, you're getting the medicinal compound, but you don't know the dose because it varies from plant to plant. Where drugs, it's a more precisely controlled dose, which is good. But on the other hand, because it's a lighter dose and because of the balancing compounds, the medicinal plant is sometimes better, although you may need to take more of it to get the same
It's more
effect.
for grounding into your system.
Yeah.
Like aspirin, for example. It's essentially, aspirin as we know it today is synthetic, the synthetic compound of willow bark without the impurities. A lot of people who have issues after taking it, but then go to willow bark afterwards, even though it's a slower process, it takes time for it to go into your system and balance, have far fewer side effects, and can stave off headaches longer in general. By that same token, when it comes to synthetics, I find it interesting that you can have the same exact, chain, and depending on how you put it together, you can get completely different
Oh, the
results.
chemical compound in which order the molecules turn up in.
Just rearrange them, even if it's the same amount, yeah. Because that's the difference between heroin and methadone.
Yep. This all actually, I think, segues very well into the other major topic we wanted to talk about, which is neo-paganism, and more particularly the pagan holdover. The fact that, well, we'll get into modern-day Wicca and neo-paganism versus historical paganism, but the reality that some pagan practices did survive into medieval Europe.
Oh, yes, they were known as superstitions that the Catholic Church could simply not get rid of, and they realized that it was better to not anger everyone and to deal with it slowly, little bit by little bit, than just telling people, no, you're wrong.
Yep. Well, this is the reality of some of these treatments. I mean, a lot of these treatments, when you're talking about the midwives and you're talking about the wise women, this is where some of the strongest, as I understand it, at least some of the strongest holdovers of paganism exists, is in exactly these people that have the more effective treatments.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And with the beginning of Wicca, you have Gerald Gardner, who was actually fairly familiar with a lot of these old remedies and, playing on the term for it, effectively old wives' tales.
Mm.
And he incorporated a fair number of them into Wicca.
And that's okay. Before we get into this, let me put a caveat, because I know we have a number of listeners of a number of faiths. In saying that Wicca is not an ancient religion, because it really isn't.
It's less than 200 years old.
Yeah, we are not saying it's a bad religion. Keep in mind, I myself as a Christian, Christianity was the new kid on the block a little under 2,000 years ago. Every religion starts somewhere. Being new does not equal bad. So we're not making a moral judgment on it. We're just talking about factually documented history.
If I could add on to it, a lot of what the confusion comes into is back when a lot of material was coming out. Because like I said, Wicca itself is like less than 200 years old. When it was first coming out, because we were talking, I think it was like either last show or the couple shows previous, about everybody's new obsession with the occult back in the 1800s. Around that time as well, when certain things were coming out, is when, because a lot of it was started in Britain, was the traditional Wicca. And quote unquote, which is where it started. And so, especially when people think BTW, they mean they're thinking of the British version. And the common misconception, especially amongst Americans, is if it's British, it must be old as hell.
Yeah, very much so.
Which is not the case.
And on top of that, those traditions are better traced through the modern English Druidicist paths as opposed to Wicca, which can more accurately be pointed to the 1950s.
And I mean, historically speaking, Wicca was created, seems, by Gerald Gardner.
Yes.
There's
at least as its own distinct thing. It drew from other aspects, but
but as the modern religion that we know it to be,
he was a great foundation point for a couple of things.
Yeah.
but it's not the be all end all, because there was better material that came out later.
Because Buckland and other very important writers continue to vastly expand on his ideas. It's just, this is the guy that started the idea, and the thing that makes it interesting, to me at least, is that Gardner was a member of the OTO. I think at one time he was a member of the Golden Dawn. He was at one time, although Crowley didn't, the man himself didn't think much of him, but he was at one time an admirer of Aleister Crowley.
Who was a douche.
There's some evidence that Crowley's ideas at least had some influence on minor aspects. Like, yes, the whole going skyclad, doing pagan rituals in the nude, was more of Crowley's influence than historical paganism.
He was very big on ritual.
Yes.
One of,
and sex. Crowley was huge on sex.
Well, there's also rumors of him being a pedo, particularly for little boys. Rumors. Confirmed or not, I have not seen the court documents.
He was an extreme hedonist who screwed almost everything that moved. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to confirm it because I don't know, but it wouldn't completely shock me either.
No, I still skewer him. I'm letting you know that now.
Yeah.
But actually, another major thing that, since we're speaking on Crowley, he was very big on ritual. There was a specific thing. It had to be done if you screwed it up even by 1/2 of an inch where you were positioned. When you took, a quarter breath for this part of this basic, moon ritual that you were doing every single week, he would throw a fit. He was very particular about that, to the point where even when everything, when Wicca essentially spread out, the different covens were doing this as well. There's actually a story about how one time during a ritual, it used to be whoever had the athame had to cut open a side of the ritual space to let somebody out, put it back down in order to close it, and then back and forth. The particular ritual was called a drawdown. And eventually the person who was actually drawing down turned around. Nobody knows to this day if it was actually the deity that was called that night or if it was the person themselves or some combination thereof. But they turned around and goes, "You can just go. It doesn't matter. We know where we're supposed to be. This is ridiculous." Because it never entered anybody's concept, especially when it first started.
They're gods, for heaven's sakes.
That, they would have been more lax, especially after so many years of not. Everybody was just paranoid they were going to infuriate the gods, and then it ended up being reversed.
The thing with Crowley in particular is, keep in mind, by his own admission, the man was a demon summoner. And there was very much you need to follow the rituals very precisely, or you're going to piss the thing off.
Considering he left holes open all the damn time.
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing. One of the things I find the most amusing about Crowley is Crowley was kind of the OG magical prankster. Because if you look at a lot of the rituals he published, they were deliberately designed to fail. His logic was, such as it was that he wanted people who were... If you picked up a book of his magic and you knew what you were doing... You know how to fix the rituals so that they will work properly. But he wanted to set things up so that a dabbler, the school kid who picks up one of the books and decides, I'm going to summon Satan, was going to have the ritual blow up spectacularly in their face.
Or, have some demon actually feel the closest to pity and go, "Okay, what do you need, sweetie?" Which I wouldn't be surprised, considering how many spectacular failures there are in general, in essentially, I'm going to call them the fluffy bunny community.
Yeah, oh God.
Which are the new people that come in, and it's not for their lack of trying, it's not for the lack of gusto or wanting to do the thing right. It's just some of them try really hard, don't know what research is, and wants to play and poke and essentially be, the
and some
campus. Sources
on magic and neo-paganism are better than others.
I.e., do not use Silver Raven Wolf.
Yeah,
she can call in and fight me. By all means, please.
She's not far. She's in eastern or central PA, or at least she was years ago when last time I checked.
So are we doing a cage match? Is that what's going to be happening?
Well, here's the thing. One place I was working at ages ago was a gentleman who he lived out in Amish country, and he was fairly along in his particular vein of pagan arts. Now, he had actually met the lovely lady by name of Silver Raven Wolf. And he purposely told me that a lot of what she cranks out, and this is essentially how I equate her to, is the, Dr. Seuss of paganism and Wicca in general, simply because a lot of the newbies aren't going to be going to some of your classics when it comes to like your stone work, your herbal work, your things like that you would need for certain rituals or certain
well, that requires more work than just reading one book and then you're good to go.
Taking Point Teen Witch, which my mother actually told me I wasn't allowed to read.
Well, another good example of this. Oh, good heavens! I lost my train of thought already. You two are good at making, and Brian too, for that matter.
Well, that's because he's supposed to be the straight man and fails.
Yeah, but you guys are good at making me lose my train of thought. But oh, that's what I was going to say. No, an old friend of mine pointed out, and I tend to agree with her, that and all due love and respect to the pagan community, but there is definitely a younger subsection of the pagan community that I think can best be described as the Renaissance fair of religion, where it's more of a fashion statement than a seriously held religious belief.
Yeah, no. Do you know how long I had to screen some of my cousins and other family members just to confirm whether they were in it for the fad? And when I realized, oh no, they're actually in this for the long haul, it's like, if you have any questions, because my mom actually raised me with this, and they're like, oh wait, really? I'm like, and I actually had to show them, because my pentacle, you can't really see it at first glance. Yeah. You actually have to look.
Drew, you had something to add?
Yes, it's not fully a new fad to have that.
Oh, no.
The origin of Wicca within the United States is tied closely to the hippie movement, where there was very much a fad for Eastern religion or older religions, and Wicca wound up within the United States developing certain forms that tied in Native American religions as well as Buddhism.
That is
so.
Well, the New Age movement as a whole is a conglomeration of Western occultism and Eastern mysticism, drawing basically. In turn, basically almost a continuation of theosophy, which shows a 19th century combination of Eastern mysticism and Western occultism, which goes even further back technically, because Gnostic Christianity combined Western religion and Eastern mysticism. We've been mixing and matching for literally thousands of years.
And this is true, and a lot of people don't realize, especially newer pagans to the party, and I actually learned this at one point myself. I actually had to be told this. Back in the day, when you wanted to join a particular pagan group or Wicca group, you didn't just show up and chat casually. No, you showed up like you were going in for a job interview for a position that was 3 times higher than what you were worth. You literally had to dress to impress and show you actually knew what the hell you were doing. And that's mainly because that was still the residual of the McCarthyism previously. Because there were a lot of people that if you were doing anything strange, people were still scared of communists.
For that matter, even as recently as when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, and before that the 70s, there was a real fear of anyone who was claiming to do any kind of magical practice.
Well, Manson didn't help with that.
Manson certainly was a big, obvious example of this. But there was the panic about Dungeons and Dragons. There was the satanic ritual abuse scares.
Biggest deflector when it comes to crime scene investigations, even to today. It hasn't gotten as severe, but back in the day, if you were doing anything fantasy based that wasn't in normal culture for the area, you were screwed.
I don't know. Probably still, but I know until quite recently, a number of law enforcement agencies asking if a teen committed a violent crime, do you play Dungeons and Dragons, was one of the most common questions to be asked.
Yeah, that's why that one parody of what actually goes on in the insidious, gamer session is Dungeons and Dragons.
If anyone has
Satan's game,
hasn't seen, anyone who's a fan of the Lou Gentili show will know the Dead Alewives Dungeons and Dragons skits, and I highly recommend looking them up if you know D&D and you don't know the skits. And for that matter, if you do know the skits, look them up because they're great for a laugh.
Somebody did one of those skits using different action figures. One of them, the guy who goes, "Where are the Cheetos?" Yeah. It's a freaking xenomorph action figure. It's beautiful.
Even better, I think actually I've seen that one. It is absolutely beautiful. Another great one to look up, which is a great moment for the neo-pagan community and gamers because it hits us both. There is an infamous Christian cartoonist known as Jack Chick, who sadly passed away about a year ago just because when you talk about he makes Alex Jones look like a rational, sane human being. I'll put it like that. In terms
How?
What?
How?
Okay. The Catholic Church secretly controls everything and was behind the Holocaust. The Illuminati is a totally real thing and runs the Freemasons. Oh, the Catholic Church also invented Islam and then lost control of it.
So is this the same guy who was ranting off and was the basis of that article that got you in trouble with somebody else a few weeks ago?
Probably.
Okay. I'm making sure I'm understanding the crazy.
Particularly famously, he wrote a comic book called Dark Dungeons about how D&D players was a gateway into actual witchcraft, and of course in Jack Chick's universe, witchcraft is secretly Satanism, and the rank and file witches don't know this, but when you get to the higher levels of Wicca, you find out no, you're actually worshiping the devil, which is so completely wrong.
To be fair, if you were following a trickster deity, they may do that just to fuck with you.
Yeah.
If you've pissed them
But
off recently.
this wasn't anything like this. It was like, no, we're actually worshiping Satan, committing human sacrifices. Mainline pagans do not kill people. Yes, there are crazy people that do.
Animals, mostly.
Yeah.
Like,
there are crazy people that do, but...
A lot of them are vegetarians.
Yes. But there are also crazy Christians that kill people in the name of God. So let's not get into judging the entire religion by the crazy offshoots. But and further, that not only that, but when your character dies in the game, you become horribly depressed and you kill yourself. And then the truly crowning moment of head desk repeatedly is at the end when she has her salvation moment. And the preacher tells her and everyone else to gather up all their occult objects to burn them. He said, there's even a asterisk with a side note. Don't forget to burn your copies of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
Because the justification of this is they're sold in occult bookstores.
Because, C.S. Lewis, very well-renowned pagan.
Yeah. No, I mean, makes me look like a proper Catholic in comparison. What, really?
You see why I say
wait. I can understand.
You see why I say he makes Alex Jones look sane and rational.
I can understand by absolute BS logic of what he's following why you would make the assumption Tolkien would go under that. But the thing is, they were still very
Tolkien
Christian.
was a devout Catholic. Well, yeah, he hates the Catholics.
Well, he was still a devout Christian.
Yeah.
And you actually see that reflected in his elves, in their meeting time and their society as a whole. And it's very obviously there. So it's like, these are probably the most Christian authors of fantasy
for that matter,
that stuck to actual fantasy.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not aware of this, fun fact, C.S. Lewis directly credited Tolkien for his conversion. The great Christian apologist said Tolkien did it because he originally considered himself an atheist, which is an interesting story into itself. But at any rate, to go back,
they're constantly editing each other too.
Yes. But to go back to Dark Dungeons,
I'm not certain if it's turning the frogs gay crazy.
Yeah.
I think they're just comparable.
I'm pretty sure Jack Chick probably believed that too. He really off the rails crazy.
Would he be stupid enough to, consider, naked nipples in public, causing miscarriages for 300 miles outward?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Wait.
What?
What?
You heard me.
Is that something from Jones?
Huh?
Is that something from Alex Jones?
I have no idea. I wouldn't be surprised if Alex Jones believed that to some extent. For him, probably 30 miles.
But at any rate, to get to the original reason I brought up Dark Dungeons, folks, if you're familiar with a wonderful series, and if anybody out there is a gamer geek, I recommend checking them out if you don't know them. There's a series of movies called The Gamers. If you're not a gamer geek, you want to understand what the heck gamers are talking about all the playtime. They're not a terrible choice. But the guys who did that went to Jack Chick and got him to approve an adaptation of Dark Dungeons. And the way they got him to approve it is they played the whole thing straight. It's funny as hell, but the humor isn't how ridiculous the ideas are. I mean, the movie starts with a secret cabal of Satanists talking about how well their work for the devil is working because more people are, and I quote, choosing homosexuality. and abortion rates are up, and again, playing Jack Chick's view of the world completely deadpan straight. But it's so utterly insanely ridiculous. You can't help. The only major thing they changed, and even that they swept it back in and made him a demonic figure from hell, is in the end they don't summon the Satanists are not summoning Satan, they're summoning Cthulhu.
Cthulhu's worse. But I could beat a Cthulhu single-handedly.
Actually, of the two, I'd rather face Cthulhu. Cthulhu just wants to eat you. Satan likes to play with his food.
But see, you have a chance to actually outwit him, which that would be hilarious. Whereas with Cthulhu, literally all you have to do is with great emotion behind you, because apparently in the mythos, if you have enough essentially humanity behind you in some fashion, you could literally go up and give him a hug.
No.
So
maybe in one of the goofier offshoots, but out of straight original mythos canon, no. You'll go stark raving mad just looking at him. On the other hand,
going slightly mad.
Going by the purest Lovecraftian canon on Cthulhu, ramming him with a steamer ship will work just fine. Because in the original story called Cthulhu, which is the one and only time he appears in Lovecraft's writings, they ram him with a steamer ship, and that's what makes him go back to sleep.
Barely. He's like, big monster, only 1 HP. Down for the account. Extreme, natural armor, but
yes.
It's still beat the AC.
Goodbye.
All right.
We are unfortunately coming up towards the end, although I believe we have a little bit of extra time. Is there any other thoughts you want to add into this, Drew?
All I want to say is at some point in time, we should talk about the 1893 World's Fair.
Yes, we should. This is probably too big of a topic to get into with the time we have left.
Oh my god, it's way too big of a topic.
But you're still, the summer isn't over yet. You still have time. Brian will be back, but unless Brian particularly objects, I'm more than happy to have you both. Yeah. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, when you left for school, I said the co-host chair would remain yours, and as far as I'm concerned, Brian's earned the chair too. I'm happy to have 3, 4, I'm happy to have as many co-hosts as I believe can give me a good show.
I'm just a felon, so that's why he's not lonely. That's the only reason he keeps me around anymore.
Well, she's also eye candy. You look better than I do, in my opinion, but I'm not into guys, so that's not a shocking opinion on my part. I do want to remind ladies and gentlemen, if you get a chance, please check out our sponsors, both Audible. You can get a free if you haven't done it before. You get a free 1-month trial and a free audiobook. audibletrial.com/paranormale, audibletrial.com/paranormale. And also, if you're looking for really good, affordable internet security, NordVPN, you'll find both of those links. I'm not going to try and read the NordVPN link on the air because it's long and complicated and nobody's going to remember it. But it'll be in the description below. Check those out. If you click on either of them, if you sign up for either of them, you're helping out the show. If you have some money and you already have a virtual private network and you already have an Audible account, you can always consider going to patreon.com/demonology. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you're available this weekend, I will be at Blackthorn Steam Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I am tomorrow night, Friday, I'll be doing a lecture on voodoo, and then Saturday I'm doing Campfire Ghost Stories and a Magic Act. It's going to be an enormous amount of fun. It's only $160 if you want to come up for the weekend, and that includes your hotel room and meals for the whole weekend. If you don't want to come for the whole weekend, if you're too busy or you're too broke to afford $160, if you come up for one day, it's free. The only thing you'll have to pay for if you want to come up for one day is if you want to take part in the meals, you're going to have to pay for the food. But if you want to come see me speak, if you want to come to all the musicians and all the other awesome things that are going on, none of that has a fee. But I think that's going to do us for tonight. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Remember, aside from throwing money at us, the most basic way you can help out the show is like, comment, subscribe, and share the links with your friends. That's going to do it for us.
And ask questions.
Yes, always ask questions. We welcome questions.
Break Kevin's brain.
Yes.
Do it.
I still need to. It is not remotely show related, but I need to tell you about what happened at the Deadlands game last night. It was one of the craziest things I've ever had in a tabletop game.
What did you do?
It's not what I did, it's the players did.
Oh, Jesus.
Okay, but that's going to do it for us for tonight. This is Kevin Mears saying good night.
This is Beth. Live long and prosper, everybody.
Drew.
Best of luck to y'all.
Good night and God bless.